Baachu Talk FM, a podcast for facilities and workplace services professionals. My name is Bhaskar Sundaram, and I'll be sitting down with the facilities and workplace industry leaders and veterans to share their stories, discuss their career, and learn how to make an impact in the FM industry. Today's guest is David Emanuel. David has been involved in the FM since the mid-1990s, working with a number of leading FM suppliers, providing full marketing and communication support with a specialism in new media. Responsible for the creation of numerous intranets and websites for both commercial organizations and for many of the FM associations, including the BIFM, the IFMA, and the Euro FM in the early 2000s, David went on to build a pioneering online news and information site for the FM sector, the IFM.net. He has been actively involved in the FM industry and organizes the FM Industry Conference, Workplace Futures, which is actually coming up end of this month. Please do log in, register. And also he organizes the Technology in FM Awards, which is a very popular award, by the way, listeners. He has served 2 terms on the BIFM Members Council as the individual member representative and was a board director of the FMA for a decade, until it merged into the Building Futures Group in 2013. He was also chair of the FM Judges of the Women in the City Awards and was the treasurer of the BIFM SIG Women in FM for 4 years before taking up the role as treasurer and board director for the IFMA UK Chapter. David is active and often outspoken protagonist for the FM sector. I know that personally myself. He believes passionately in the role of the FM sector has to play in the economy, business, and the community. There is so much to talk today, David. Welcome to Baachu Talk FM. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Let's go back to the very beginning, David. Where were you born? And let's talk about your early life.
So I was born in northwest London, right at the end of the Jubilee line, in a place called Stanmore. I went to school, first pre-prep and prep school in Northwood. And then I was very fortunate to be educated in a private public school and boarded in a place called Aldenham. And Aldenham was just down the road from Haberdashers. And I think the real fame for where the school was located was George Harrison had bought the manor house in Netchmore Heath and had given it to the Hare Krishnas.
Oh, wow. Okay, how was it? Do you have any early childhood memory? Anything comes to mind when you reflect today?
I was very fortunate. The pre-prep school fed onto the prep school. It was a very small school with about 3 teachers, and they were fantastic. And it was a really friendly, vibrant upbringing there. And a lot of the people that I was at prep school then went on to the boarding school that I went on to. So there was a lot of continuation. And I have to say that I'm probably still very friendly and in touch with about a dozen people I was at boarding school with. I think a lot of different judgments about boarding schools. I think you either love it or you hate it. It's either a fantastic experience or it's not. For me, it was. And I made lifelong friends and really enjoyed it. It's a very sporty school. We spent a considerable amount of time doing activities and sports.
Wow, that's what kids these days are missing, isn't it? It's a challenge, but glad that you had an amazing childhood. And from then on, talk us through your teenaging and any high school, university.
So I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, actually. So I went into business studies, and I did that at the University of Hertfordshire, Hatfield Poly at the time. And boy, that campus has changed since I was there. I've been back to see it as an alumni, and it's really changed quite a lot. So I did business studies, and I kind of realised back then that I think what I really wanted to do was advertising. Really enjoyed the creative process, really enjoyed the selling of an idea and convincing people that it was worth buying. And I think we've all seen that TV program, Mad Men, based out in New York. And a few of my friends did go into advertising. So I left for this, having done business studies, and I went to a publishing company as a graduate trainee that had an advertising agency. And they said to me right at the beginning, okay, so you're going to do 2 years and 3-month stints in each department. Which department would you first like to go into? So I said advertising, thinking they were going to put me in the advertising agency, and they didn't. They put me on advertising sales on the magazines. And they had a brand new magazine called Green Magazine, rather ahead of its time. The editor was the son of David Bellamy. I don't know if you remember him, great environmentalist. And it was an interesting magazine. Those that were green didn't want to shout from the rooftops that they were, and those that weren't did. So it was a very strange beginning. I was the lowest of the low. I was put on classified. I was selling lineage, and I think our first magazine with the chairman, our first meeting with the sales team and the editorials with the chairman, and the chairman's looking over and he's saying, right, what's been sold? And nothing had been sold apart from one person that sold a double-page spread, and that was me. And of course, that didn't really engender myself with all the rest of my colleagues, because I was supposed to be selling lineage, and I'd managed to sell the only advert in the whole of the magazine, and it was a double-page spread. So the managing director took an interest in me from there, and he said to me, right, you're going to come and work for me next, which I did. And I did 3 months working with him. And then after that stint, he said to me, right, well, I don't really want to let you go. And I said, well, I'm supposed to go on to my next 3-month stint. And he said, you are. He said, Howard, I'll tell you what we'll do. You can come in an hour earlier than everybody else, and you can stay an hour later than everybody else, and you can do 2 hours of work for me each day. So we were based in the Docklands. I lived in Stanmore in northwest London. If I got up and left the house at 6:30, it would take me about an hour, maybe a bit more, to get there. So that was it. I had very long days, but I spent 2 years going through each of the departments, understanding how publishing worked, working with the managing director too, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and then became commercial manager for the group. And so that was my first job, and that was my first intro into publishing. So it wasn't quite the advertising that I thought it was going to be. They subsequently sold the advertising agency, so I never actually had a 3-month spell with the advertising agency. I liaised with them on certain projects that I was doing in other departments, but that was it. And the idea of getting myself fully engrossed into advertising sort of went out the way.
But what an amazing entry into the publishing world, which you are now known for in the industry, David. I mean, like, just as you might have seen publishing evolving from print media into online media into digital social media today. How was it then? How was the whole publishing then?
Well, so IFM was the first FM magazine, if you like, to go online. In fact, very few people were going online. But I kind of realized that publishing wasn't really very sustainable. You know, we were cutting down trees. Everything had a real time delay on it. You know, from setting out that magazine to creating the film, to then making the plates, to then printing it, to then sending it out to people. There was pretty much a 6-week delay. So anything that was newsworthy wasn't really news by the time it reached everybody's desks. And then, of course, people don't necessarily pick up the magazine on day one, might wait a few days. So really what I was trying to look at was something that was a bit more immediate. And what we had done was we'd created an intranet for a company called CBX. So our first real FM client was a company called CBX. Which was a management buyout from Xerox. So they were the in-house FM team, and then Curry and Brown put the money together with some of the senior team, and that's how it became CBX, Curry and Brown Xerox. I don't think very many people knew. They started off with about 30 people and grew to, I don't know, probably about 300-400 people. And then Solza bought them. Today, I think that they still remain in a little way under NG because they became Cofley and then NG bought Cofley. But there was quite a few different transitions over the years. But it was an interesting start to the FM sector because so many people that worked at CBX then went on to become managing directors or leaders in other FM businesses. So it was a fantastic time of meeting people in the FM sector then. So we'd created this intranet, and the whole point of the intranet was basically to try and force the employees to use other tools on the system, whether it was HR tools, whether it was expenses, whether it was just looking at processes and policies. The intranet was there to inform them. And that started to grow in terms of the content we were delivering. And we started doing competitor analysis and looking at the other FM providers and what they were up to. And then we had this light bulb or this eureka moment that actually, why are we doing it for one organization when we could do it for all the organizations? Why have it as an intranet when you could have it as an extranet? So that's what we decided to do. We decided to create IFM and create the content for the whole of the FM sector. And that was all well and good. And our business model was to rely on advertising. And we started developing it in 1999. And by 2000, I think there was a company called lastminute.com. And then the whole internet bubble burst. And everyone was questioning whether or not there was a commercial viability for anything online. And I suddenly realized we had to do what I described to the team as a do or die mission. And they said to me, well, what's the do or die mission? I said, we either do this or we die. It's that simple. And they said, well, what do we have to do? And I said, we no longer give this content away for free. We have to charge for it. If this content is valuable and has a value, then we have to sell it and sell a subscription. And there was probably only one or two other organizations out there in the entire world that was selling subscriptions to online systems. Everything was free. And in fact, I think that was really the premise of the internet to start with, that it was the disinformation of free information. So we changed our system, we put everything behind a paywall, and the rest is history, as we say.
Okay, I think was it an immediate transition from that advertising agency that you went on to this IFM, or was there any in between stints, David?
There was one company. So when I was working at Northern Shell, as I said, I'd worked very closely with the managing director. He left the organization and he asked me to go join him. And I did. And he'd left London and he bought a publishing company down in Cornwall, right down in Penzance. And so I, having lived in London all my life, I went to live in Cornwall. And wow, that was an eye-opener. Cornwall is a beautiful place to go and stay for a holiday. The work ethic down in Cornwall is not quite the same as in London. And we would discover that it was really hard to get people, either in production, especially in sales, to work hard. And it really was, you know, they got paid on a Friday and then you wouldn't see them until the money had run out. And they literally didn't come back to work. So we decided that we would change the location of the business, and we relocated back up to London in Islington. Very much more a familiar area for me. And interesting, we opened the doors of the office on this Monday morning after the Christmas period. And I was wondering how many of the people or the salespeople in Cornwall were actually going to come back and relocate to London. And the answer was simple, not one of them. Yeah. So we opened the doors, there was three of us. There was a managing director, his wife and myself, and not one of the other employees came back. So that was an interesting time where we had to recruit new people and rebuild the business very quickly while still having deadlines of magazines to run. And it was a tough time. And then one of the clients wasn't particularly happy, and he asked me whether or not I could publish the magazine for them. And that's what I decided to do. I left with Fiona, who was the editor of the magazine, and at the time it was called the UK Industrialist Group, and we went off and set up this magazine. And that was that interim period. But it was very tough setting up a new business with one title. And anyway, we then got this contract work with CBX. And then we went on and we created IFM.
Nice. I think, the journey is beautiful, David. I think publishing, intranet, sharing insights, sharing news is as you rightly said, it was pioneering then, it is pioneering till date, even after 20 years. So well done, kudos to you and your team. So let's talk about, I know you only saw it from the publishing side, but when you entered the FM industry, what were you posting early on in the 1990s to what you're posting today? You might have noticed things are very different now. Talk us through from the intranet or the IFM angle of how was the world then in the late 1990s, early 2000s, the noughties, now the 20s.
Well, I think what's quite interesting is if we look at the brand names that are out here today compared to then. So it's only 22 years, but boy, the landscape's unrecognizable. So many of them have either been acquired, have rebranded and changed names, or gone out of business. And there's a lovely article on IFM called the evolution of FM over 20 years, the changing times, and there we've got a matrix of companies that were back then and are no longer now, or how they've changed and rebranded over the years. So it's very different in terms of brand names. It's also very different in terms of what companies do. So I think what the whole sector is being built upon, this premise that by outsourcing your facilities management, you can save money and cut the bottom line. And back in the 2000s, companies were promising organizations they could save them 30%. It was an amazing promise, and if you were just doing your first round of FM and outsourcing, you probably could save 30%. And certainly probably on energy management, that wasn't an issue, you could do that. But of course, on your next round of outsourcing after 3 years, because indicatively contracts were either 1 or 3 years, they'd be looking for another 30% saving. And of course, that was very hard to deliver. So I think probably one of the things that attracted people to outsourcing of FM was the cost reduction. And one of the issues that the sector has suffered has been the race to the bottom, that commoditization and that sort of people undercutting one another. And I think that's really what's caused an awful lot of issues within the sector, that actually we should be trying to provide value, not trying to cut costs. And that's been one of the biggest problems. Of course, the other problem, well, not a problem, but the change in things was there were a lot of contracts for single services, whether that was cleaning, catering, or security. They were all sold on a single basis. Then we started to evolve and look at bundled services. And then we started to look at total facilities management or integrated facilities management. So the whole sector over the last 20 odd years has changed in the way that it's been delivering services. And I also think that we've changed the message quite a bit. So right at the beginning, we were talking about saving people money. Then we were looking at health and safety and compliance, and we're talking very much about the building and the compliance of it. And of course, I think back then we weren't really looking at the bigger picture. We were looking at buildings. And actually those buildings are only there to house people. Really what facilities management was doing was looking after the well-being of people. And I think that's evolved, and our understanding has sort of grown that it's actually people that we're looking after, not so much just the buildings. And I think this is going to evolve over time too. And I think that we're going to be looking at, well, okay, we're looking not only after the well-being of the people, but we are looking after the well-being of the buildings, but we're also looking after the well-being of the planet. And sustainability has got to be a lot more prevalent in our thinking in the way that we provide facilities management. And I'm not just talking about the reduction of plastic, and we're going to have to do a lot more. And it's not just about decarbonisation either. I think sustainability is very much a three-legged stool. And I think we're going to, and that's why I'm delighted that this year's Workplace Futures is all about FM and sustainability and that relationship. And I believe it's going to be a huge commercial opportunity for FM. But I think it's a bit like technology, where technology can be a huge enabler for FM in terms of driving the efficiency, looking at the data and the analytics, but who's going to pay for it? FM has got ourselves into a very low margin business. And I think we've done that to ourselves, but we need to be able to try and add value. And if we're adding value, that has a value, and we need to charge for it. So the sector really needs to sort of, you know, be able to create better margins and better profits. And I think we'll see that hopefully starting to happen soon.
Totally, David. I think the way you started with just like, you know, the 20 years of how the industry evolved through the eyes of the service providers, it got rebranded, it got acquired, it got bust and so. We have seen the time and time again. And also, as you rightly said, the way services are procured from single to bundle to TFM, now again to specialist services, mostly based on the resilience of the providers, was fascinating. And also the final point is, okay, FM was always, there was this interesting thing that we found out, which is like, you know, in the overall FM cost in any larger enterprise, 1 billion plus enterprise, is 0.8% to 1.2%. So, but what you find there is, but if the chief exec or the CFO wants to cut costs, they don't go to the top 5, they go to this FM to slice it even further. And that's the perception that we have created within the industry, which is like, for some reason, we still have given the message to the world that there is still some fat on it. And the second point, as you rightly said, it is because it's a low margin business. When you are trying to provide value added services, unfortunately, if you bucket that part of your existing service, then you have to add it part of your service. Whereas if you kind of made it as a standalone entity or a standalone service, then you may be able to build the services out of it. Again, that's where I think the interesting dynamics is going to come. But thank you for sharing that, David. Also, at the end, you did touched about workplace futures. You know, running IFM itself is tough, as you know. You have to collect all the sources. You have to add it on a regular basis. But talk us through that one first. You know, how does IFM always shares the contract awards, the contract wins, the news one, and then on, while you're doing that, what kind of enabled you to do the Workplace Futures Conference, which is one, and then let's also talk about the technology in the FM award as well.
Okay, well, maybe I should, excuse me, I should start with Workplace Futures. So I think we're in our 16th year of Workplace Futures, and my first conference was the BIFM conference. Excuse me. It was a 3-day event in Cambridge. And it was a leaders, the fellows of the BIFM would attend. The way that the conference was put together was that they would have a call for papers, and they would sift through those papers and work out who they wanted to present. Some of it was quite intellectual, some of it was very much sales pitches. And over the years, it started to become very much more about organisations selling and standing up and pitching. And I really didn't think that was very good. One year I was sitting next to Peter Middup, who was the publisher of PNFM, and Mary Taffler, and who was the Secretariat of the Facilities Management Association, and also the CEO. And we said, this isn't a great conference, is it? And we all agreed it wasn't, and that it needed to be improved. And Mary said, David, couldn't you do a better conference than that? And I said, yeah, probably could. And Mary said to Peter, do you think you could do a better conference than that? And he said, yes, I'm sure we could. So I said to Peter, well, why don't we have a go and do it together? So he said, okay. So that was our first conference that we worked as a triumvirate between the FMA, myself, and PNFM magazine. And it really didn't make any money at all. And the others basically said to me, oh, you know, we thought it would be easier than this. And I said, no, there's a hell of a lot of work involved in creating a conference. So PNFM really didn't have an appetite. FMA really didn't have any money to invest in it. And I thought, well, this is quite interesting. For us, you know, we're putting out content. We understand what the key concepts of the day are. And what I wanted the workplace features to be about was the emerging themes of each year. So I don't think the other conferences really ever were themed. It was just the BIFM annual conference. You know, there was no real sort of topic. In fact, they had streams, so you could choose. There were three or four different streams going on at any one time. So different delegates would get a different experience of the conference. And my thought was, well, this is ridiculous. It's several days long. You can go into different streams. You choose your stream. Some had one person in it, and others had the majority of the people in it. I thought, well, this isn't the right way to run a conference. You want to take people on a journey. You want the conference to provide a logical journey and pathway and understanding, and there should be takeaways, and one member of an organization attending should be able to cascade that information down to the team when they go back to the organization. So very much I wanted Workplace Futures to have a different theme each year, that to be themed as to what was going on within the sector at the time. And so that's how we differentiated Workplace Futures. And of course, it was a day. You know, it was just one day long. And I kind of felt that, you know, facilities managers couldn't really spend too much time out of the office. And I think the other thing that we did in terms of our differentiation was it was very much for the industry, not for the profession. So I think BIFM or IWFM has tried to be all things to all men at different times. At one point, yeah, it's very much been for the professional, the in-house FM. But then it was saying it was the voice of the industry too. Then it decided it wasn't the voice of the industry. It wanted to be the voice of the profession. Now I'm not sure what it is apart from a voice for itself. So that was another differentiator. It was very much for the service providers and for them to engage and to discuss and to collaborate. And I thought, well, that was something that we really didn't have a real good platform for collaboration within the industry. And I think that we would be further ahead if we have more opportunities for leaders to collaborate and create a voice for ourselves and go forward. And I think that's why I was very keen to get involved with the Facilities Management Association. And I was a director of it for about 10 years. And then came this sort of moment in time where there was a call to merge all the organisations together. And I wasn't sure that was a great idea or not. And I don't think everyone, I think we were polarised, like lots of things today, politics, Brexit. It was split pretty much down the middle, and I wasn't sure where I thought it was going to be. And I thought that the FMA merging with the BIFM might have been a good idea, but not if the BIFM wasn't going to join in. They decided that it wasn't right for them, and the FMA then joined Asset Skills. And within, I think, 12 or 14 months, it went into administration. And that was that. They burnt through their money, and they didn't provide any value. And I think that was a problem. I think that if back then there was a better strategy of how it was going to work, it could have worked. But anyway, it didn't. And I think that's a real shame that the industry doesn't have a voice. We don't have a voice. We don't have representation at government, and I really think that we should.
Totally, David. I think what an amazing story. I think this is what I really really blessed to highlight stories. I mean, because you could have just sat on and continued just running IFM, made it as a much more successful commercial entity. You then came back, were part of the FM associations, trying to create the voice of the profession, voice of the industry, and other things, and did your best on this. But obviously, as you rightly said, over a period that things got evolved. But Workplace Futures, as you rightly said, there's a sustainability theme, and it goes live in the next 2 weeks. Any words around it?
Yeah, so it takes place on the 22nd. We're at 1 Great George Street. For many, many years, we were at the Crystal, which is actually the Siemens. Siemens there have a sustainability expo, and when we were there for many, many years, and it was the right home for the conference. And the reason I say it was the right home for the conference was because there were many FM providers that are involved in running the building. It was all about sustainability, and it was a really comfortable venue. Some venues we'd had in the past, we were sort of stuck down in the basement with no window and no natural light. And if we all understand what FM is all about, it's about indoor air quality, it's about natural light, it's about acoustics. And they have this dedicated auditorium. And when you left the auditorium, we were in this area called the Street, which was an open area, glass-filled atrium area, light and very breezy. And a nice place to be. And I always said, we would never leave unless we found somewhere that was better. And we decided that the reason we would give 1 Great George Street a try was because it was in the West End and wasn't out in the Docklands. But again, great facilities there. And I think that interestingly, so whilst the Crystal had very many different FM providers involved with its running, the Crystal does everything in-house. And I think that's another interesting area, that there are organisations out there that are now looking and thinking about going back in-house again. Certainly councils. And I wonder why they're doing it. Is it about creating a better environment or a better workplace? Or is it really about the cost, and then perceiving that low margin that their service providers are making, they can take that back? And I think it is. I think it's about cost. And most organisations or councils that I've seen that have taken things back in-house, I think they run them for 3, maybe 5 years, and then they decide, actually, this isn't working for us, and they go back out to market. And I think over a 5-year period, I think that they do more damage than they do good. And they're not getting the value from running the in-house team, because I think that's where the knowledge level stays. I think that it could be better accelerated and get better innovation in if they were using service providers.
Totally, David. I think you raised a very fair point. I think when we kind of went out to the market and understood, is insourcing actually rising? Yes, totally, it's rising within the NHS and the local councils. You're right, but the underlying reasons is because that people, because end of the day, FM is a people's business, right? You know, we can talk about sustainability, innovation, technology, and all the buzzwords, but end of the day, it's still the same cleaner, it's still the same security person, it's still the same porter who's just going to work for this NHS trust. The only thing that's changing for him or her is the uniform that says, today I'm part of X, tomorrow I'm part of Y. So he or she is much more associated with an entity who is working for like 15 years or 20 years, working for the same council, working for the same NHS trust. The only thing is his brand name gets changed, right? So it's much more associated to his buyer rather than to his actual service provider who is paying his bills. And that was never kind of nailed down. And that's where you're going to see, or especially on the NHS side, where there is people feel much more proud about, I work for NHS rather than I work for X company.
You know what? I find this whole conversation part of it intriguing. And there are those that work within an organization that go native, and they wear and they could be working for a service provider, but they have no branding to show that they work for that organization whatsoever. You know, the branding they're wearing is the organization that they're at. And I find that interesting, because I think that if you're going to outsource, yes, on the one hand, you want people to work as one team, and that you want everybody to work to a common objective. But surely, if you're outsourcing to an organization, you're doing so because they believe that they can provide a better service. And therefore, you should be proud to have that logo on those people there, because it signifies something.
Totally, David. I leave the thought to the listeners to just see what they are doing there. But the end reality of what's happening today in what you call the union strikes and stuff might tell us a different story.
So my comment there is, if you see a G4S logo in terms of security, or you see a Sodexo logo in terms of sort of food delivery service, you should think, wow, I'm going to be secure here, or B, I'm going to get great food service here. And I think that's why outsourcing should be there. You know, those brandings should represent something. And I think that the people that are wearing those brands should be proud to be working for those companies too. But they're only going to be proud to work for those companies if they invest in them, and they give them training, and they provide a culture of the organization that they're working for. So yes, they might be on site for a client, but they should feel proud that they're working for that organization, because that organization has communication with them, is training them and developing their career all the time.
Okay. I think where it all connects to, David, before we close this topic, is when early on you mentioned every 1 year, every 3 year, a contract gets renewed. So what that means is the investment that goes into a particular contract, by the time the contract gets mobilized, it goes for year 1 to stabilize it, and for 6 to 12 months it will be running, then it will be ready for the renewal. So within that thing, there is a cost of mobilization, there is a cost of transformation, and then there is a cost of what we call recompete, right? So, and this is the cycle that the service providers goes through all the time. And in between, the person who's standing there is always going to stand there, regardless of what happens, unless the contract duration gets increased, unless, as you rightly said, the business are trying to focus more on value. This cycle is always going to be around.
So 3 has always been the magic number, a 3-year term. And actually, we need to move on. We need to go to the 3+2. We need the extensions. And in fact, I think it would be far better off to see a 5+2. But I think what we have seen during the last couple of years is, and I think this is mainly because people didn't want to go through the exercise because of COVID. The contracts have remained as they were. So I think that that's been an interesting development, that contracts have extended for another year or another year. So there's going to come a crunch point. There's going to be an awful lot of contracts that will be re-evaluated on the market.
Correct, David. I think it's fascinating what COVID, as you rightly said, has brought up the best of the best, and also it also showed some of the worst.
I think it also brought out the worst and the worst as well.
Exactly. That's very interesting. And again, you know, that's why the portals like IFM is very important for you to share all the positive stories or some lessons that learned that could have been better. So did you find in this 2 years, the stories that went through IFM, any kind of memorable ones, or what was your thoughts on past 2 years?
What I find fascinating over the past 2 years is that we really had an opportunity to shine. That the whole sector's had this amazing spotlight thrown upon us, and I think I remember one award ceremony and Dara O'Brien describing FMs as the sort of magical army of fairies that sort of wander around unseen and get everything done, and that's a really wrong way to look at FM. We should be visible and upfront and in your face, and people should see us and communicate with us. And we shouldn't be stuck down in the basement, and we shouldn't be hidden away. We need to be visible, and I think this has been it. You know, we've security and FM has all been about keeping people safe within the workplace, and I think that's been critical. So I think that the stories that I've enjoyed reading the most is how FM has kind of become to the fore and people have taken notice of us. I think that it's been an opportunity for FM to collaborate more with one another. I don't think there's ever been if you look at, say, the Nightingale hospitals, so many different service providers were involved in those projects, working together for the common good. That's been fantastic to be seen. I also think there's been a hell of a lot of merger and M&A activity over the past couple of years. I don't think we've seen quite so much of that. And whilst some of those contracts or those acquisitions have been quite modest, some of them have been in the billions.
Right.
So I don't think we've quite seen that for some time. And of course, we've got Equans being sold to Bouygues. We had G4S being sold on. So there've been some very big deals happening. So I actually tweeted the other day, I don't want to spoil the spoiler, as to saying, you know, every year we do a review of the news stories and we look back and we sort of, you know, highlight on a monthly basis what the big stories were. And I put it out to the Twitter audience, you know, what do you think was the most read story in IFM of 2021? So I'm not going to spoil it here and now, but I think it'll be fascinating to shout that out and to tell everybody what it was.
Well said, David. Well said. So, David, I think we kind of looked at your early life career. We also kind of went into the IFM workplace futures, and you also touched early on about your association for 10 years with FMA. But then you also went on to take up other roles. Let's just talk about those things before we close part one. So, yes, you were part of FMA as a board director for a decade, and then talk us through about your IFMA roles, the chair of the BIFM Judges for Women in the City, treasurer of the BIFM SIG Women.
So,
yeah,
I think it's really important to give back. And probably one of my criticisms of some of the people I've met on different committees over the years is that they're there for themselves. They're not there for the organisation that they're there to represent. Some of them have done absolutely bugger all apart from join a committee and then not actually participated in it. I think I've been very fortunate in my career to have people that have supported and mentored me and assisted my micro progression through. And I think that that's something that you have to, it's give and take, and I think you have to give back. So I think for me, it was volunteering and charity was something that was instilled upon me from a very early age with my family. And in fact, one of the schools that we sent my daughter to, 2/3 paid for 1/3. So there were people that were very wealthy at the school, and then there were people that had absolutely no money. They literally, some of them were refugees or from very impoverished and places that from all over the world. And that was it. That was the beautiful part of the school, is that children came from all over the world, and 2/3 of those fees were paid for, and 1/3 of them were actually free. And so I thought that was a really good way of operating. And I kind of think that everybody should give a little bit back. So for me, joining and becoming a director of the FMA, or being the individual's representative, was about giving back to the organisations that were there. I think the Women FM was. I think we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion now. And when I first came into the to the industry, there were very few women. I mean, it was 20% women, 80% male. And even at an event I went to the other day, I looked around and it was really 90% male orientated. It's changing, and we're getting a lot more. So when somebody invited me to become on the chair of the treasurer of the Women in FM, I was thrilled. I thought, good, they're underrepresented, and we need to support them more. So that's why I sort of got involved with that. And then it went on with the Women in the City too, because of my role there. They said, would I like to come in and look at women in the city? And there was an FM group. And I'm really pleased. 2 years, the winner of the FM category became the overall winner of the awards too. And we're going up against solicitors, we're going up against accountants, we're going up from all different professions in the City of London. And the 2 years that I was there judging, our candidate was strong enough to win. So very, very pleased by that.
Totally, David. I think I know you downplayed what you just said. Now there's a lot more you did, but that's okay. We'll leave it to the listeners to find more on that. But again, from then on, you were also part of IFMA UK. But the most fascinating thing for me personally is you kindly introduced me to pattern makers. Thank you so much for that. And talk us through about pattern makers as well. And Martin Picard and Lucy James, who always preside over workplace futures and stuff.
So it was Martin Picard that introduced me to the pattern makers in 2014, I think. And what I found fascinating by the pattern makers is that we went to some dinners in some livery buildings, which you just didn't know existed. They were fantastic buildings, that stood the test of time. The pattern makers are the worshipful company of pattern makers. It's a London livery, and its origins date back to the 12th century. It got its chartership in the 16th century. And of course, back then, everyone that was a liveryman, it was part of their trade. It was their license to practice. I think Martin explained in the podcast to you that the pattern makers made patterns. They were shoes or clogs that elevated you out of the mud, because back in the medieval times it was just effluents running through the streets, and so that stopped your silk shoes from being soiled. Of course, there's a lot of footwear organisations within it today, but Ian Scar-Hall of GSH, he created a new part. So there was footwear, there was city and service, and then there was the FM and built environment sectors that came in. What really attracted me to it was the amount of money that they raised for charity. I've been overwhelmed by how and where that money goes. So I was very pleased to become part of it. I got my freedom of the City of London, and then moved on to become a liveryman. And then they asked me if I would become their webmaster. And so I thought, well, okay, great, that's an interesting thing to do. So breathed a little bit of life into the website and the membership system, and created some analytics and some tools on it. And then they asked me to join the membership committee, and I joined the membership committee. And before long, they asked me to become the chair of the membership committee. So I became the chair of the membership committee. And last year, I was very pleased that they invited me to become a court assistant. So I'm going through the sort of the levels of that, and hopefully in maybe 8 or 10 years' time, I will be the master of the livery. And of course, our purpose is to raise money and do good. And I've been amazed that, we've raised nearly £200,000 for the DRMRC Cafe this year, which is supporting injured servicemen rehabilitate. And what we have done is help create a new space for them by the end of the day of their sort of, whether it's counselling or whether it's physical re-education, to give them a space to relax and unwind. And but it's not just that. We do a lot of work with schools, providing laptops. We fund people at St Paul's Choristry. We fund people at the Guildhall School of Arts and Music. So I'm proud to be part of that. And as I say, giving back in life, I think is, you either like receiving presents or you like giving presents. And I think you get more joy from giving than receiving.
I think you beautifully said that, David. I think thank you for that. I think before we close part one, David, the last one, which I think we missed out, was Technology in FM Awards. So talk us through, when did you start Technology in FM Awards and the whole ethos behind it?
So that's been running for quite some time now. And of course, we ran it because back then there wasn't a technology award in any of the other awards. So, the two main awards are the IWFM awards and the P&FM Partnership Awards, and both are very good. But when we started, there wasn't a technology award, and we kind of thought to ourselves, technology was changing at such a pace. And the whole way that we had developed our business model was all about technology. So I wanted to recognise that by creating the Technology in FM Award. And I've got to say that over the years, I found that one of the most fascinating and enjoyable parts of my job, of people presenting their technology ideas and how they have changed and made business practices more efficient or created a better service for people. So I found it fascinating. And of course, they're presented at the conference. I can't tell you who's won this year because that will be announced in a couple of weeks. But what I can say is that the way that people have the technology and the way it's being used is changing all the time, and I find that sort of pathway fascinating.
Totally. Thank you, David. Thank you for doing that. And again, as a prelude to part two, we talked a lot about your career, FM, and other things. Tell us 3 things not many people know about you, David, and then we'll...
So I was public schools judo champion in my last year of leaving school. I was I led the judo team. I went on to do some local judo matches as well. I then realised that to progress from sort of county level judo to national level was a whole nother step up entirely, and I didn't have the time. Well, I don't actually think I had the skill either. But in terms of my matches, I was undefeated. I don't think I'd ever lost a match. And partly because I had one special throw that always caught people off guard. And I always seemed to get an ippon, which was a 10, and always used to sort of win with that one throw. Up until I fought somebody that had fought me before and knew it was coming. And then I quickly had to change tactics. What else can I tell people that they don't know about me? I think most people know I'm a petrol head. But I've got a motorsport association driving license, which allows me to drive on track. And I've had a number of single-seater sports cars that I've really enjoyed driving. And what's probably the last thing that people don't know about me? I very much enjoy shooting. I've held practical pistol and rifle licenses. Not anymore, because they've changed all the rules. But yeah, back in the day, I had a 357 Magnum and a 45 Auto, and I lived in Shoreditch, and the gun range. I was a member of 2 gun ranges, one in South London, and back then you probably needed a gun on you to drive there, but one in Cambridge. And I used to ride my motorbike up to Bassingbourne Barracks to shoot on a Saturday or a Sunday. And I'd have an ammo case locked that was strapped down as my pillion on the motorbike. And I had a 357 Magnum in a shoulder holster and a 45 Auto in a side holster. And used to drive up from Shoreditch up to Bassingbourne.
Totally. I think this is much more fascinating, David. We'll just take a break for part 1 and we'll come back at part 2 and we'll talk more about this and people in your life and so many other things. So thank you so much. And we'll tune into part 2 in a minute. So welcome to part 2. In part 1, we talked about David's early life, his career, FM, how FM evolved, IFM, workplace futures, technology in FM, different associations he was part of. And we ended up talking about David's hobbies and interests. Let's go deeper. David, I know you like motorsports. It's amazing. I mean, like judo, motorsports, rifles and guns. And you also play tennis and you love skiing. Is that right?
I do. So I think there's a common theme to all of this. If you were to ask me what my favorite film is, it would be James Bond. So I think as a child, do you know what? As a child, I wasn't allowed guns or a bicycle. So I think kind of as you grow older, the things that you were deprived of, you sort of long for. So I think, as soon as I could get my first motorbike, I got my first motorbike. And I had my pride and joy was my Harley Davidson, and I sold it last year, and I'm pretty sad that I sold it. And I keep looking, I keep thinking I'm going to buy another one, but my wife's not very keen on them.
Totally. I think you have all the skill sets to become James Bond. I was planning to ask you, if you're making a biography or an autobiography of your story, what type of movie it should be and who should act? David, do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, it'd be nice if it was Daniel Craig or Jason Statham, actually.
Most probably you can play your own character, David, don't you?
That'd be lovely to be able to, but no.
David, if you could be invisible for 12 hours, what would you do?
Do you know what? I mean, actually, I think the problem with being, I think if I could be invisible for 12 hours, I think I'd quite like to go in and pop into Boris Johnson's flat and see what's going on there at the moment. I think it's fascinating what's happening in politics at the moment. And whilst I have no aspirations to get into politics whatsoever, I'd love to see what 12 hours in the life of Boris Johnson would be like.
That's amazing. I mean, like, you just want to be invited to one of his party, don't you?
Well, no, I'm not sure I want to be in the party, but I'm fascinated to see what goes on. There was a fantastic program in the 70s called Yes Minister and then Yes Prime Minister. And the backstabbing and the political shenanigans that went on at the time were funny. And of course, then there was a more recent program called The Thick of It and W1A. And I've always found those programs to be very entertaining. So I think I'd quite like, if I was going to be invisible, I think that's where I'd like to watch and observe.
Perfect. Yeah. David, if you had the power to shrink anything and take it with you, what would you do with it, and which one would you shrink?
Do you get to unshrink it, or do you just get to carry it around shrunken?
It's okay, up to you.
So I love my house. So if I could take my house, actually shrink it down and take it on holiday and then unshrink it and live there in a warmer climate, that would be bloody perfect. Okay,
what an answer, nice one. So David, judo, rifles, motorbike. So you have done, I think, what most people think is courageous things to do. From your perspective, what's the most courageous thing that you have ever done?
Goodness. I'm not sure about courageous. Probably some of the most stupid things I've ever done has been on the skiing. I've been heli skiing, so I've been jumped out of helicopters, been picked up by helicopters, and gone off to ski on places where where there's virgin snow on pretty dangerous mountains. Hasn't always worked out well for me. One ski trip I ended up with a split lip, black eye, and neck and a neck brace, and a couple of hours in hospital, having knocked myself out unconscious.
Wow. So hope it's all okay. I mean, and you still continue to ski?
I still continue to ski. Unfortunately, due to COVID, haven't been skiing for a couple of years. But love skiing. Love the thrill of it. Love the freedom. Being up on a mountain and that fresh air and the scenery, and then just being able to feel exhilarated by the speed and the adrenaline. And of course, I also think that skiing is one of the best holidays to go on. I think that not only are you active all day long, the food is fantastic. There's plenty of drinking to be had. There's plenty of socializing to be had, and you sleep really well at the end of the day. And one of the great things is I've been skiing with my family. I've been skiing with business colleagues. I've been skiing with friends, and it's just a very sociable pastime.
Nice. So let's continue a little bit. David, who or what made you laugh or smile recently?
I think my kids. I think the kids always make me laugh and smile, and so do my pets. I've got two dogs. I've got a pretty old grumpy Jack Russell, and I've got a 1-year-old New Zealand Huntaway, and they make me smile the whole time because the Jack Russell doesn't really like the Huntaway, and the Huntaway thinks that the Jack Russell's his best friend. The Huntaway annoys the hell out of the Jack Russell, and it's just hysterical to watch him wind him up.
Just reminds me of my children, David. That's okay.
No, it used to be the kids that used to sort of, antagonize each other and keep each other going. But of course, they're grown up now. They've both got jobs and they're living in London. So it's just the pets that keep me entertained.
Got it. So what takes you out of your comfort zone?
Well, I think some of the skiing that I've done has very much taken me out of my comfort zone. I've actually got a fear of heights, and I was invited. So there's kind of two stories to that. One year I was invited over by Mick Dalton, that was working out in Dubai, and he took me to the Burj Khalifa as it was being built, and we went up on a builder's hoist to the 92nd floor. That's pretty damn high up. I mean, when you think, you know, the Barclays building in Canary Wharf is 32 floors, so this is 3 times higher. You know, you're above the clouds. And all that was separating me from the ground was a piece of rope around the building, and I kind of stood and looked over at the bottom. And I was a little bit frozen at the time. I think that helped me get over my fear of heights a bit. And skiing, I remember I went free riding, and free riding is where there are no elevators or ski lifts or cabin cars to take you up to the top. You literally spend 3 hours walking to walk to the top, and you've got special skis with reindeer skins on them to help you get some traction up there. Anyway, you spend 3 hours walking for what can be a 20-minute ski back. And we got to the top. This guide took us to the top. We walked across. Again, something that was very scary because, you know, you could have fallen down either side. And then we got to the top of this mountain, and we took our skis off. And what took me out of my comfort zone was, I got the fear. Didn't want to put my skis back on. And when I did put my skis back on, I certainly didn't want to take that plunge over the top down a very, very steep path. And I was there thinking, Christ, am I going to be able to do this? And then the others looked and saw the fear, and they said, David, the only way you're going to overcome this fear is if we go and we leave you. And you're going to have to get over it. And I did. And actually, once you do something, it's not as difficult as you think it's going to be.
Totally. Wow, that's amazing. So, David, if you could have a complete knowledge of 3 things, what would you want to know?
Well, do you know what? One of my favorite programs as a kid was Joe 90. And this kid, he used to put these glasses on and go in this machine, and he would get the knowledge of whatever he needed to go out on his special mission. I don't know, I'd love to be able to fly a plane. So one of the things on that knowledge would be, I'd like to be able to fly aircraft. I think I'd like to get supreme knowledge of the financial market.
Oh, yeah.
I could then make myself billions. So I definitely like that. And I think maybe knowledge of how to get on with people better, so that you could please everybody.
Totally, David. Have you ever sent a text message to a wrong person, David?
Yeah, I think I probably have. I'm not going to tell you what that message said.
That's perfectly fine. David, if you were a captain of a pirate ship, what would your name be, and what would be the name for the ship?
Oh my gosh. So we were talking about a pirate ship here, are we?
Right.
You know what? That's such a strange question. I've no idea. Absolutely got no idea on that one. What I would call the pirate ship.
Okay, if you could be any male or female sports star, who would you be?
Well, I love Formula One. And I traveled to Japan to see Michael Schumacher race. So maybe I'd like to have had his career up until the point where he had his skiing accident, because obviously now he's not a well man. But I'm very envious of his track record in terms of Formula One.
Got it. So if you could make a special meal for a guest, what food will you cook, and which special guest will you invite?
Well, I don't think cooking's necessarily been my forte. I think some people are very creative in the kitchen, and other people aren't. and I don't think my culinary skills are up to very much. But I think it would be nice to just invite my family and be able to cook for them. It's yeah, the food I used to prepare for the kids wasn't amazing, as they keep reminding me.
Fish fingers.
Yeah, do you know what? I still like a fish finger. Yeah, no, do you know what? I always thought, someone said to me, you know, what's the, you know, how do you cook? And I said, I cook with my finger. I used to open up the microwave, put something in, and press the buttons on the microwave. I think that was the limit to my cooking abilities. Actually, I can do quite a good chicken schnitzel.
Ooh, that's nice.
But it's not particularly elaborate.
Is there any particular food that you dislike, that you cannot eat?
Liver.
Ah, okay.
Liver and kidney. I've just got to say that at school it just looked particularly repulsive, tasted particularly repulsive, and it was one of those foods that instantly made me want to gag. Just the taste of it and the texture of it. Apart from that, I'll pretty much eat anything.
What do you get every time you go for grocery shopping?
Well, I still like to buy these pre-made microwave meals from Waitrose. I just find those a very simple lunch option. So I always buy those. But I also buy packets of Roundtree's fruit lollies.
Okay.
I don't know what it is. I seem to have one a day.
Yes. So what's the nickname that your friends have given you, and what does it mean?
They used to call me Dave of the Rave back in university.
Oh, wow. So
I think it's self-explanatory.
That's why I didn't ask any follow-up. I'm keeping your reputation intact.
Yeah.
So what's the furthest you have traveled to?
I think the furthest was Japan. As I said, I went over to Suzuka. Michael Schumacher was he was leading I think it was 2010. He was leading the competition. We were 2 races before the end of the season. He was in the lead. He just needed to win Suzuka. It was tabled to be the last ever Formula One at Suzuka, and they were going to move to the other circuit in Japan. And we went over there. We left on a Thursday afternoon, and I was back at. In fact, it was. Can't remember what the name of the show was called then, the FM Expo or the Facilities Show, but it was on at Earls Court. I was back there exhibiting on the Monday morning. So we actually spent longer in the air than we did on the ground. Schumacher's car broke down. He lost the race. And it was the first time that Schumacher had ever broken down that season. And so he didn't win he didn't become world champion at that race, and it was quite disappointing. But that was the furthest I've ever traveled.
Wow, what a memory, what a memory. And do you listen to music, David? What's on your music playlist now, or what song do you normally listen to, type of songs?
Well, I now have iTunes, so I subscribe to iTunes. So I kind of let iTunes play random stuff to me. But I've got this, I've got, gigs worth of data, so in the garage there are lots of CDs that are stored there. They all got ripped. So I spent ages ripping those digitally. And putting them on my iPad and my iPhone, and then of course you don't need any of that now because you can just stream it. But it's interesting. My musical taste is quite varied. I go back to the 90s and love the sort of the new romantics, but at the same time I kind of really liked Lloyd Cole and the Commotions. I really quite liked, I don't know, when I lived in London, I lived in this place called Princess Park Manor, and I was surrounded by, I had girls around Girls Aloud that lived next door to me and below me. I had One Direction living in my block as well. The Wanted were in another block. So I don't know. I kind of sort of, and the kids, you know, I like to take them to see concerts, and they were into sort of, you know, the pop that was then. So I used to sort of listen to a lot of that just to sort of keep myself up to date with it. But very mixed. As I said, from Duran Duran to sort of Lloyd Cole to Razorlight to Elton John, to Suzanne Vega and people like that. It's quite mixed, from soulful to a bit more funky.
Thank you, David. That ends the random rapid fire questions round. And let's move.
I think that was the hardest part of the podcast.
It's just to get to know the other side of you, David. I think that's glad. Thank you for joining. And David, who are the people who have been the most influential in your life and career?
Definitely my grandfather and my father. So I know, you know, when people talk about influencers, you know, most people say, oh, things like Churchill and Mandela and the Dalai Lama, and but I didn't really know any of them. So they haven't had that personal impact on me. Whereas I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, and it was fascinating. He gave me the sort of the drive for business. He was a business entrepreneur, and he gave me the passion for business. And my father, I think, gave me the sort of the passion for charity. He was very giving in terms of his charitable donations and giving back to society. And he kind of instilled that sort of that necessity to give back.
That's good, David. And in career?
There've been a few, actually. Probably Martin Pickard the most. I've worked with him. So Martin's been the chair of Workplace Futures for 16 odd years. Before that, I sort of knew him from the BIFM days, and through IFMA. And he's invited me along to a lot of different events and got me sort of orientated. And so again, as I said earlier, I think it's very important that, you know, people invite you to things. It's then important that it becomes your turn to reciprocate and to start sort of, you know, taking people around and showing them around.
Totally, David. That's beautiful. Thank you, David. What's one personal trait you like the most about yourself?
Gosh, that's a difficult one. I guess the one trait that I like about myself is the fact that I'm willing to talk to anybody, and that I enjoy talking to lots of different people from different walks of life. I had put together, me and the team, we had developed a website for the Blythe Sappers. It's a non-profit organisation for old sappers. You know, and they invited me to their annual luncheon yesterday, and I found it fascinating to talk to these people. You know, they've had such different careers than I have, and that you find commonality, you find common interests, and I find that I think that's the thing, that you find the things that interest you and that you can get on and converse with people.
And you have seen the FM industry evolving for good, and you also saw few practices that could have been avoided. What's that one common myth about the FM profession that you want to debunk?
I think I want to debunk the fact that it's about cutting costs. I mean, yes, you know, we used to do these audits and surveys, and we'd say, what's the most important thing in facilities management? And cost. Especially when we were talking about tenders, and costs would come up time and time and time again. And of course, it's important. You know, as we said earlier, it's a commercial organisation. That's why people are doing it. They're trying to cut costs. But I want people to really appreciate that actually the value of facilities management isn't about the cost cutting. It's about the other benefits that it gives organisations. It's how it nurtures and creates better well-being for the people using buildings. And I think that's really the one thing that we need to change. It's the good that it does for the people in the buildings, the organisations, and also for communities. I think that the one thing that we forget is that FM has a great opportunity to do a lot of to have a social impact, and to help change and get people that are from impoverished, deprived areas and give them opportunities to work. I think the one thing that people forget is if you give people an opportunity, they will embrace it and they will make the best of it. And I think FM can do a lot more.
100%, David, totally. David, who haven't you seen or talked to in a long time, and you hope that they're doing okay?
Gosh, lots of people, actually. I think that's the whole problem with COVID. We're only now just starting to sort of get out and about. So there are lots of people. In fact, there are lots of friends that I haven't seen. And I think that seeing them on screen is one thing, but actually sitting down and having a meal with them or having a drink with them is completely different. So there's not one person, there are many people. There are many friends that I just haven't seen over the last period. And what's quite nice is that I'm looking at my calendar and actually if I've got people coming up to stay for weekends, pretty much the next few months are chock-a-block. So it's friends and family. I mean, the one thing that I've always been quite keen on is to make sure that I still seeing the family and regularly going into London just to see the kids, or they're coming up to stay. But I don't think I've seen many friends, and also clients and colleagues. So again, really looking forward to Workplace Futures. There are people at Workplace Futures I won't have seen in person for some time. And then there are a few special people that I have got to see that I feel very fortunate that I have seen over the period.
Okay. Thank you, David. David, what's the best piece of advice you have received and from whom?
I think it was probably from my father, and there were probably a couple of pieces of advice. One is, do unto those that you would like done unto yourself, i.e., treat people like you'd want to be treated. I think that's a core thing. And I think the other thing that he said is, if you first don't succeed, try again.
Nice, two powerful advices there. And David, on the other side, what advice would you give an aspirant, an FM aspirants, looking to pursue a successful career in the FM industry?
Get involved. Not only get involved, I think the first thing is find somebody to mentor you. And when you've been mentored, you've got your career going and established and you're succeeding, is then give back, then find somebody to mentor yourself. So I think that's kind of important. I think that the way to success is find people that will take you under their wing and then reciprocate that back.
Nice, David. I think what a fascinating story, David. David, I think we look back your early life career, FM, IFM, then your associations with the then industry bodies, the all other initiatives that you worked on, pattern makers to Workplace Futures to FMA to Tech in FM. You also touched in part two about some of the hobbies, interests, and also some questions to dive deeper about you. Is there any part of your life or career, or is there anything else you would like to share in the last minute of the episode, David?
No, well, I mean, the interesting thing is that I got remarried 3 years ago, and I moved from London to the Cotswolds, and I feel rejuvenated from leaving London at the age of 50 and coming out into the countryside. And I got to say that space is a beautiful thing. I think the countryside is a beautiful thing, and it's just a lovely way to start the day. I love taking the dogs out for a walk and just seeing. I don't think when I lived in London, I really sort of appreciated nature. I don't think I appreciated the seasons so much. And I think the further you get into the countryside, the more you sort of discover how the seasons change and affect the way that you feel and that you are.
Wow, what a profound advice. I think many people who will be listening to this podcast from wherever they are can definitely reflect on the particular thing as the world now comes back into whether it's a 3-day week, 2-day week, or in some cases work from home forever or 5-day week. As you know, there is a lot of surveys going around based on personal choices. That single message which you just said now is just evolved, just work around here is very, very strong. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for joining Baachu Talk FM. Wish you, your family, your loved ones, everybody in IFM, workplace future, success, all the good health and happiness. Please do continue to inspire the FM industry colleagues and everybody around you. Thank you so much for joining again. Thank you.
Brilliant. Bhaskar, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you at Workplace Futures, and also look forward to seeing you at the next Pattern Makers dinner in March.
Definitely, David. Thank you so much.
Excellent. All right. You take care.